This is 9/11, 10 years after. From WMAL and the Museum, where history lives. Here is Torie Clarke.
With us is KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst, WMAL contributor, and I think one of the smartest people out there on national security. And KT, talk a little bit, and we've talked so much about the future and where we're going as a country on national security, but talk a little bit about where you were on 9/11, what was happening.
Well, I live in Manhattan, and I was downtown when it happened. It was a Tuesday morning. It was an election day, so I'd taken my two youngest kids to school and had gone down to lower Manhattan and saw the first plane hit, saw the black smoke, and by the time the second plane hit, realized that it was a terrorist attack. At that point, I started walking it from lower Manhattan because there was no public transportation.
Right.
It was immediately evacuate everybody from Manhattan Island, so the bridges and tunnels were closed. So I walked up town, went to my husband's office at Grand Central Station where they were evacuating everyone, and made it up way to the Upper East Side to my kids' schools. My youngest daughter's school was trying to close because her teacher's husband had been in the Twin Towers when they went down, and so she had no teacher. So
Wow.
I picked up my daughter and about 10 of her little classmates, took them home. My son's class, they had not let everybody go because a number of the kids in his class had parents who were working in the Twin Towers. And the terrible thing about that day was that no one could communicate.
Right.
The cell phone towers were down because they were on the top of the Twin Towers. So you could really only find people if you could walk and find them. So in my son's class, the two of his classmates didn't know what happened to their parents and didn't see them until 3 or 4 hours later when they showed up at the classroom door covered in soot. They had made it out and had with it like a zombie-like army of New Yorkers had walked from lower Manhattan uptown. I think what changed my life, though, was seeing my younger daughter's class where there were 10 little girls. They were 10 years old. They were now knowing that people were dying. They saw them jump out of the windows on television for the first couple of hours. They showed that, and I didn't know what to do. I mean, I didn't know what to say when they said, well, my teacher's husband is in that building. What's going to happen to her? And so I had them all make cookies. And we took dozens of cookies to the police and fire stations that were just a few blocks away, not knowing that those policemen and firemen were not going to make it back. And it changed my life profoundly because at that point I was in retirement. I had been in the Nixon and Ford and Reagan administrations, and we had won the Cold War. So I thought it was just a great time to raise our 5 kids and be a stay-at-home mom. But when that happened, I realized that there was another war coming, and I should be prepared for it, and I should get into the fight. My older daughter, who was in 9th grade at the time, she ended up going to the Naval Academy and wanted to become a naval officer to defend her country. I got back involved in the national security debate. I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2006 against Hillary Clinton and lost, but have continued talking about these issues. And as you said very kindly, I now work at Fox News as the national security analyst.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I had no idea about your daughter. That's incredible. That is wonderful.
Well, in fact, and the reason I think she did it was the girl who she had so looked up to, who was 5 years older than she was, who was, hand-me-down clothes my daughter Fiona had worn for years, whose hand-me-down nightgown she slept in every night. That girl had just graduated from college and was in her first job and died and the Twin Towers were struck.
Yeah, as we were saying, everybody knows somebody who died that day, whose lives were just greatly impacted by it, and people made real life changes as a result of it. People joined the military, those sorts of things. But knowing what you know now, should we have been able to predict this? Should we have seen, should more of us have seen this coming? This sort of goes back to pre-9/11.
Yeah. I think it's always so easy in hindsight to say you should have strung these thoughts together, you should have put the pieces together. I'm not sure anybody could have. They may have seen the rise of Al-Qaeda, the rise of militant Islam, but the thought that they could hijack airplanes filled with jet fuel and turn them into weapons, into missiles, which is what they were. No, I don't know that that's something that could be foreseen. What I think that the bigger picture, though, of what America needs to focus on is, what kind of a war have we been fighting for the last 10 years? And to me, we made a lot of the same mistakes in the war against terror that we made in Vietnam, which is mission creep. We went into Afghanistan to do one thing, and we did it very successfully in 3 months. We got rid of Al-Qaeda. They ran over the border. But instead of then leaving and looking to a new mission, we then stuck around in Afghanistan and tried to nation build, which was an impossible task. And my worry is that we've spent the last decade fighting wars that started out as a good idea, but were badly executed, badly administered. And we're now in this, we've got such a bad taste in our mouth as a nation, and we're facing such economic problems as a nation and deficit spending, et cetera, that I worry that the time when we really should be engaging in the world, we're going to retreat from the world. And that's not the right place to be.
Mm-hmm. I wonder sometimes also if it is, as Americans, we like things to start and end. We like things clean and neat and with square corners. And it's very hard for us to think of a world that could go on for decades, could go on for centuries, in which perhaps a war, and we're so limited by our vocabulary, doesn't end. Maybe for quite some time Afghanistan is not the safe haven it was for Al-Qaeda. Maybe someday we have to return there. But I'm with you. It went from preventing terrorist attacks on the United States to something broader.
It's something broader, more expensive, and impossible.
Right.
When I was in the height of the Cold War, there was something called the Weinberger Doctrine, which I drafted for then Secretary of Defense Weinberger. This was in the Reagan administration, and it was a set of principles that would govern the U.S. use of U.S. forces, combat forces overseas, and it was a very restrictive document. And a very restrictive, you don't go to war unless it's in your vital interest, and if you go to war, you do everything you have to do to win. You don't do it partially. And if you're not prepared to do all those things to win, don't start the war.
Don't go. Right.
And I think that was something that has been forgotten. I think it's being looked at, and people are dusting it off the shelf and looking at it again now. But I think that was a mistake that we made, and it may be something that, like you said, we don't understand the long war concept. For us, a war is something you fight, you win or lose, you finish, you sign the treaty, you leave, you get on with your life. That's the American approach. It always has been, and that's our greatest strength, is that we always look forward. We're never looking in the rearview mirror. We're not looking there for long. And the adversaries we face, whether it's in South Asia, whether it's in the Middle East, or Far East, those are adversaries who look at things. War is not an end game. War is just something you do, then sign a treaty, and the peace is just a pause in the fighting.
Right.
It's not an end of the game and you move on to the next. And it's a different mentality for the United States. I'm not sure that we should go be like they are, because our greatest strength is that we do always look forward, but we should certainly understand what kind of an adversary we face.
Well, and I think also understand that times are very different. Again, so much of how we look at things is colored by what we have seen in the past. And maybe it's movies about World War II, but we like the end. We like the signing ceremony on the deck of the ship. And we're hopeful that we'll see it going forward, but I don't think that's reality. And I think sometimes leadership, and it is a bipartisan failure as far as I'm concerned, isn't honest enough with the American people.
That's the key, is to be honest and upfront with the American people about what is going to happen and what kind of sacrifices they have to make. I think it's the unknown that's the hardest. I mean, to me, what I look at today, or where are we today versus where we were 10 years ago, I think there's a real debate in this country that will start about, does democracy work? Is this a system which can we be self-governing? I mean, how many times have you heard people say, if we could only be China for a day? I don't want to be China for a day. I like my democracy. I think that it's real, or in the Middle East, where they seem to have, they seem to be marching to a different drummer. But the question is, does the model of self-government, can we have delayed gratification like we did in America's history? I'm not so sure, but I think it's a fight.
And I think democracy is one of the most wonderful things. It's also one of the most problematic words. And I've always tried very, very hard to say, when we talk about other countries and what we hope happens in other countries, I try not to use that word, because people think
self-government is the better word.
Yeah, a representative form of government. But
self-government, where the people choose, whatever system that is. It doesn't necessarily mean you go to a polling place the first Tuesday of November. It could mean that you go to the shura, you go to the council meeting, you go to with the tribal elders and thrash it out. No, I completely agree with you. And that whole notion that everybody's got to be like us, again, is a very American notion, but it's it doesn't face the reality of the world that we live in.
Well, another American notion is metrics. We love to measure things and say, are we winning, are we losing? And you, I think, more than a lot of people understand that national security is not just about what brave men and women in uniforms do. It's about what we do legally, it's what we do economically, it's what we do diplomatically. Look across the national security apparatus and tell us how you think we're doing.
Again, I think a lot will depend on whether we get our economic house in order. And if we're unable to do that, either because the political will isn't there or the special interests are so dominating, then I think that we really, the game is over. Because if we don't have the economic prowess of the United States has been what's made all the other possible. Yeah, we have a better system. It's much more attractive. People look up to us. But at the end of the day, it's America as an economic powerhouse. And if we don't regain that position, I think it's not only to our great detriment. I think that the notion that America, leading from behind, you start leading from behind long enough and nobody bothers to look back. They just keep going and they leave you in the dust. So the key will be to get our economic house in order, to revitalize our own economy, and to rekindle the American spirit. Then I think it's great. If it's not, then I think that we are no longer the world leader. I think that the United States ought to be prepared for that kind of a world, and I don't think we are. On the other hand, Torie, if we figure it out, if we figure out how to restore America's economic vitality, if we figure out how to have people who are self-reliant and realize that they can't get the handouts from government, realize that Big Brother isn't taking care of them, but act as their own, the rugged individual that America was built on, then we will show the world not only does America work, but wow, it's the only place that works, because every mature democracy is struggling with the same stuff we're struggling with deficits, with debt, with lending, with social programs. I mean, what is the balance? And if we can figure it out, then I think the next 100 years are golden.
Is it a good sign or a scary sign that Great Britain is wrestling with this and seemingly wrestling with the entitlement problem, if you will, better than we are?
Well, it's not unusual. If you look at, say, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. Margaret Thatcher got onto it. They had a bigger problem than we did, and I think they do today. And she was really the first one to go at it and then found a willing partner in Reagan when he was elected thereafter. But so maybe, the next election will be the time that we really have that time for choosing.
Right. Okay, global perspective. How is the world looking at us these days?
I think with confusion. The world doesn't want a world that, the countries of the world, they don't want a world dominated by somebody else's rules. They want America to be the world's leader. They just want America to be a benevolent leader and to be a leader that gets it right. They're not looking for a world with no leader or a world that has no rules of engagement, and they're certainly not looking for a world where, say, China sets the rules. They want America to lead. They don't want America to lead from behind. They want America to lead, but in a way that helps the entire world, not just America's self-interest.
Are they sometimes unfair expectations or hopes?
Sure, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, you always hate the sort of richest, most powerful, cutest girl in the room, right?
Right, and you hate the Yankees.
Yeah, okay. But on the other hand, what would the world be without them? Yeah, I think you have to expect that. That just sort of comes with the territory. On the other hand, as my old boss Colin Powell used to say, when you get in trouble, you want to call a cop, and that's when you pick up the phone and call America.
Okay, so 10th anniversary of 9/11. It's a Sunday. People have lots going on. Football's back on. These sorts of things. If people just focused on one thing that day on that anniversary, what would you want them to focus on?
To rebuild America.
Mm-hmm.
To rebuild that shining city on the hill.
When most people think about the war on terror, they think of Afghanistan. They think of Iraq. Some people start to look at what's going on in Africa. But where do you see the war on terror going? What should we be paying attention to looking ahead?
In looking ahead and who is the adversary, I think it's no longer just Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was sort of, operating system 1.0, and that was a group of well-educated fanatics who were able to get adherents to become